Marcus Hill was just trying to get to work. A tired black dock worker driving through a cold morning, thinking about one thing only: getting home early to celebrate Christmas with his kids. The tree was waiting. Dinner was planned. Life felt calm for the first time in a long while. Then the flashing lights appeared. A routine checkpoint turned violent in seconds. He was pulled from his car, cuffed, and pinned against the door. When officers opened the trunk, they found a sealed crate filled with illegal cargo, something Marcus had never seen before. In that moment, he wasn't just arrested. He was already judged. What no one knew was that this wasn't a mistake. It was a trap. And the truth would cost more than freedom. It would risk lives. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. Baltimore woke slowly under a pale December sky. A thin layer of frost clung to the edges of parked cars, and the harbor wind carried the sharp smell of salt and steel through the narrow streets. Christmas lights still blinked lazily on brick row houses, their colors soft and tired, as if even they hadn't fully recovered from the long night. The city felt quiet, holding its breath between darkness and day. Inside a modest two-story house on the east side of town, Marcus Hill stood by the front door, tightening the zipper of his worn winter jacket. Marcus was 46 years old, a black man with a broad frame shaped by decades of physical labor at the docks. He wasn't tall, but he carried weight in his shoulders, the kind that came from lifting crates, tying ropes, and standing through freezing mornings by the water. His face showed the quiet exhaustion of responsibility. Deep-set brown eyes, a short-cropped beard flecked with gray, and lines at the corners of his mouth that came from years of worry rather than laughter. Yet that morning, there was something softer in his expression. Behind him, the living room was half-finished for Christmas. A medium-sized tree stood near the window, lights already wrapped but ornaments still resting in an open cardboard box. A small plastic star lay on the coffee table, waiting for someone to place it on top. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, mixed faintly with cinnamon from a candle Alyssa had lit the night before. On the couch sat Alyssa Hill, 20 years old, slim and tall, her long dark hair tied loosely at the back of her head. She had her mother's gentle eyes, but her father's seriousness. Alyssa had grown up faster than most. Losing her mother to illness when she was 15 had shaped her into someone careful, protective, and observant. She smiled easily with others, but worry always lived just beneath the surface. Standing beside the tree was Jordan Hill, 18, lean and restless, with sharp features and curious eyes that rarely stopped moving. He was at that age where his body had grown faster than his confidence. Jordan was smart, especially with technology, but he still carried the quiet fear of becoming invisible in a world that judged too quickly. He held the small plastic star in his hand, turning it over again and again. Marcus stepped toward them and crouched slightly, pressing a gentle kiss to Alyssa's forehead, then resting his hand on Jordan's shoulder. "Tonight," Marcus said, his voice low but steady, "I'm coming home early." Alyssa raised an eyebrow. "You said that last Christmas." Marcus smiled faintly. "I know, but tonight is different." Jordan looked up. "You promise?" "I promise," Marcus replied. "We eat together. We finish the tree. Christmas dinner. No overtime." Jordan grinned, lifting the star. "I'll wait to put this on until you get back." Marcus nodded, holding that image in his mind as if it were something fragile, something he needed to protect. He grabbed his keys from the hook by the door. The door closed behind him with a soft click. None of them knew it was the last time Marcus Hill would walk out of that house as a free man. The drive to the docks was familiar. Marcus followed the same route he had taken for years, passing quiet streets, shuttered shops, and the distant outline of cranes rising above the harbor like metal skeletons against the sky. The radio played a slow Christmas song, the singer's voice warm and hopeful. Marcus tapped the steering wheel lightly, thinking about dinner plans, about how Alyssa liked her potatoes mashed instead of roasted, about how Jordan always ate too fast. Then he saw the lights. Red and blue flashed ahead, cutting sharply through the gray morning. A temporary checkpoint blocked part of the road. Orange cones, a police SUV, 2 officers standing near the curb. Marcus slowed, his stomach tightening. He had nothing to hide. His license was valid. His car was old but clean. Still, experience had taught him that stops like this were rarely simple. One officer stepped forward and raised a hand. "Pull over." Marcus complied. The officer was a white man in his early 30s, tall and rigid, with a stiff jaw and eyes that scanned Marcus before he even spoke. His partner, slightly older and heavier, stood back with his hand resting near his belt. "License and registration." Marcus handed them over calmly. The officer glanced at the documents, then at Marcus again. His tone changed, harder, sharper. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus frowned slightly. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus opened the door and stepped onto the cold pavement. What happened next unfolded faster than his mind could process. Hands grabbed his arms, his body was pushed forward. The metal of the car door pressed against his cheek, cold and unforgiving. His wrists were forced behind his back, cuffs snapping shut with a sharp, final sound. "Hey, wait, what is this?" Marcus said, his voice rising. "I didn't do anything." "Stay still." His breath fogged against the car window as pressure forced him down. The world narrowed to the sound of his own heartbeat and the scrape of boots on asphalt. One of the officers moved toward the back of the car. Marcus twisted his head slightly. "Why am I being detained?" No answer. The trunk opened. There was a pause, just a second too long. Then the officer spoke. "We've got something here." Marcus felt a chill deeper than the winter air. "What do you mean?" he asked. "There shouldn't be anything." The officer pulled out a large, rectangular crate wrapped in black plastic and thick tape. It looked heavy, deliberate, wrong. "Illegal cargo," the officer said flatly. Marcus stared, disbelief flooding his face. "That's not mine," he said. "I've never seen that in my life." The second officer stepped closer. "It was in your vehicle." "I don't know how it got there," Marcus insisted. "I swear." The officer met his eyes, expression unreadable. "You can explain it at the station." Marcus felt something break inside his chest. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet and deep. As he was pushed toward the police car, he thought of Alyssa waiting at home, of Jordan holding the star, of the promise he had made only minutes ago. The trunk closed. The lights flashed on. And as the police vehicle pulled away, Marcus Hill disappeared down the road, leaving Christmas behind him. That year, Marcus did not come home. The courtroom was colder than the streets outside. The air was dry and heavy with the silent tension of those who had decided their own fate before a word was uttered. The wooden chairs creaked softly as the spectators shifted in their seats, coats draped loosely over their arms, their eyes fixed on the man standing alone at the defense table. Marcus Hill stood upright, his hands resting on the smooth edge of the table. He wore a borrowed suit jacket that didn't quite fit his broad shoulders. The sleeves were too short, revealing the faint marks of handcuffs from that morning. His face was outwardly calm, but his teeth were clenched, his eyes vigilant, scanning the room as if trying to understand why his life had narrowed so quickly to this moment. At the front of the room sat Judge Harold Whitman, a white man in his 60s with thinning gray hair and a stern, wrinkled face. He had been a judge for decades, long enough to be known more for his efficiency than for his compassion. His posture was stiff, his arms folded neatly across his chest, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the room through his narrow glasses. To Marcus's left sat Prosecutor Daniel Reeves. Reeves was about 45, tall and impeccably dressed, his black hair neatly combed, his voice trained to command attention. He exuded the air of someone who rarely failed. For him, cases weren't about people, but about patterns, statistics, and compelling stories. And this case, he believed, was rather simple. Revev rose from his chair. "Your Honor," he began, his voice firm and controlled. "The defendant, Marcus Hill, was apprehended at a legitimate checkpoint. Illegal goods were found in the trunk of his vehicle. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of tampering. The vehicle was entirely under his control." He paused, letting his words settle. "This is not a complicated case." A low murmur spread through the courtroom. Marcus felt a weight on his chest. Revere's turned slightly, his gaze fixed on Marcus. "Mr. Hill," he said, "do you deny finding the consignment in your vehicle?" Marcus swallowed. His hands clenched and then relaxed, as if reminding himself to remain calm. "I do not deny it being there," Marcus said. His voice was calm but tense. "I deny knowing anything about it." Reeves tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You work at the docks, don't you?" "Yes." "A place where illegal goods frequently pass through," Reeves continued. "And you expect this court to believe that a large container appeared in your car without your knowledge?" Marcus raised his chin slightly. "I expect the court to believe the truth." The prosecutor sighed softly, almost chuckling. "A dock worker. A sealed container. Found in the trunk of his car. An unbelievable coincidence." The murmurs grew louder. Judge Whitman raised his gavel and struck once. Silence. Silence returned. But it wasn't the silence of justice. It was the silence of a verdict awaiting pronouncement. The judge leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Marcus. "Mr. Hill," he said, his voice cold and decisive, "you are asking this court to accept that a large crate was placed in your car without your knowledge. Do you understand how unbelievable that sounds?" Marcus felt his throat tighten. He thought of Alyssa's face that morning, of Jordan holding the star. "I swear," Marcus said softly, "on my honor and on the lives of my children, I had no knowledge of the crate being there." For a moment, the courtroom was completely silent. Then Judge Whitman leaned back in his chair. The silence that followed was not the silence of conviction. It was a suspicion sharpened into something almost certain. In the second row behind the defense table, Alyssa and Jordan sat side by side. Alyssa's hands were clasped tightly on her lap, her fingers intertwined so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. She watched the judge intently, reading every change in posture, every shift in tone. Years of early responsibility had made her sensitive to danger, to the moments when something was about to go wrong. Jordan sat stiffly, his jaw clenched. He had never been to court before. To him it felt unreal, like a place where words mattered more than the truth. His eyes darted back and forth between his father and the prosecutor, and a slow, unsettling realization crept into his chest. They weren't listening. A court-appointed defense attorney stood beside Marcus, a thin man named Thomas Reed. Reed was in his late 50s, bald, his eyes tired, and his voice unconvincing. He had too many cases, too little time, and too few resources. He believed Marcus might be innocent, but belief alone wouldn't change the outcome. Reed cleared his throat and stood. "Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record. He has worked the same job for over 20 years. He has raised 2 children alone since the passing of his wife. There is no evidence connecting him directly to the contents of the crate beyond proximity." Reeves didn't even look at him. Judge Whitman nodded once, not in agreement but acknowledgement. "Noted," the judge said. The word felt hollow. As the hearing continued, procedural details were discussed. Charges, potential sentencing ranges, dates for further proceedings. To Marcus, the words blurred together. What he heard instead was the unspoken conclusion forming in the room. Guilty until proven otherwise. When the session ended, the bailiff instructed Marcus to step back. As he was led away, he turned his head just enough to see his children. Alyssa met his eyes and forced a small nod as if to say, "We're here." Jordan stared back, his expression a mix of anger and fear. That look stayed with Marcus as he was escorted through the side door back into custody. Outside the courtroom, Alyssa finally exhaled. "This isn't a trial," she said under her breath. "It's a formality." Jordan's voice shook. "They already decided." Alyssa looked at him, her eyes sharp now, focused. "Then we can't wait for them to save him." Jordan nodded slowly. In that moment, something shifted between them. Fear was still there, but it was being replaced by resolve. If the court wouldn't search for the truth, they would. The night felt heavier than it should have. Baltimore was quiet in that uneasy way cities get after midnight, when even the streetlights seemed tired. Alyssa sat at the small kitchen table, her laptop open, the blue glow reflecting in her eyes. She had changed out of her courtroom clothes hours ago, but her body still felt tense, like she was bracing for impact. "Dad was set up," she said quietly, breaking the silence. Jordan looked up from his phone. He was pacing the narrow living room, restless, his hands running through his hair again and again. "I know," he replied. "And if we don't find proof, they're going to lock him away like he never mattered." Alyssa nodded. Fear was still there, but it had sharpened into something more focused. She had always been careful, always the one who thought before acting. Losing their mother years ago had done that to her, taught her that hesitation could cost everything. Tonight, that instinct had returned. "We start close," she said. "No theories, just facts." They began with the neighborhood. Alyssa pulled up the home security footage from their own camera. It showed nothing useful, just darkness, passing headlights, a stray cat moving through the frame around midnight. Too clean, too empty. Jordan frowned. The camera didn't glitch on its own. They made a list on a scrap of paper. Times, dates, people who knew Marcus's routine. Dock schedules. Routes. Anyone who had asked too many questions. That list narrowed quickly. Evan Carter, their neighbor of 3 years. Evan was a man in his late 30s, average height, lean with sharp features and a permanent half-smile that never quite reached his eyes. He always dressed casually, hoodies, work boots, baseball caps pulled low, and spoke with an easy friendliness that made people trust him without thinking twice. He had helped Marcus fix a fence once, brought over beer during the summer, asked questions about the docks, about schedules, about traffic near the port. At the time, it had seemed harmless. Now it didn't. Jordan stopped pacing. He knew exactly when Dad left for work. Alyssa's fingers hovered over the keyboard, and he knew when no one would be watching. They needed more footage, something external. At dawn, they walked 3 blocks to the corner grocery store. The owner, Mrs. Patel, was a thin woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a kind face. She had known Marcus for years and greeted Alyssa and Jordan with concern. "I heard about your father," she said softly. "He's a good man." Alyssa hesitated, then explained what they were looking for. Mrs. Patel sighed and nodded. "The camera faces the street," she said. "It records everything." She led them behind the counter, where an old monitor flickered. Jordan leaned in, his breath shallow. They rewound the footage to the previous night. At 12:57 a.m., a figure appeared on screen. Evan. He moved cautiously, scanning the street before stepping toward Marcus's car. The video showed him opening the trunk, struggling briefly with a heavy object, then pushing a large, dark crate inside. He closed the trunk carefully, wiped the handle with his sleeve, and disappeared into the shadows. Alyssa felt her hands begin to shake. "There," she whispered. "That's it." Jordan stared at the screen, his chest tight. "He used our dad like a delivery truck." They copied the footage onto a USB drive. For the first time since the arrest, hope flickered, but it didn't last long. As they stepped outside, Alyssa felt it before she saw it, that sense of being watched. Evan stood across the street, leaning against his truck, arms crossed, eyes fixed on them. The friendly smile was gone. Jordan slowed. He knows. They turned back toward home, their steps quickening. Halfway down the block, a van pulled up beside them. The side door slid open. Everything happened at once. A hand grabbed Jordan's arm. Alyssa screamed, but another hand covered her mouth. She smelled oil, metal, something sour. The world tilted as they were shoved inside. The door slammed shut, plunging them into darkness. When the van stopped, they were dragged out into a cold, echoing space. A warehouse. The building was old, its walls rusted and flaking, the air thick with dust and dampness. Dim light filtered through broken windows high above. Somewhere, water dripped steadily. Evan stepped into view. Up close, his features looked harder, sharper. The easy charm was gone, replaced by irritation and something darker. He held a small knife in his hand, the blade catching the light. "You should have stayed curious," he said, voice low. "Not brave." Alyssa forced herself to meet his gaze. "You framed our father." Evan laughed softly. "I used an opportunity, that's all." Jordan clenched his fists. "You're ruining his life." Evan stepped closer, the knife rising just enough to make the threat clear. "Your mistake was thinking the truth mattered more than convenience." He leaned in. "I just needed the crate to get to the port. Someone would have picked it up. Easy. And if your dad got caught, that's on him." Alyssa felt a surge of anger cut through her fear. "You chose him because you thought no one would fight for him." Evan's smile returned, thin and cruel. "And yet, here you are." He gestured to the empty space around them. "Too late." He ordered them to sit against the wall, tying their hands loosely but enough to keep them still. Then he stepped back, checking his phone. As he turned away, Jordan caught Alyssa's eye. They were trapped. But the truth was no longer hidden. The warehouse smelled of rust and damp concrete. Alyssa sat with her back against the cold wall, her wrists bound loosely in front of her, fingers tingling from fear and restricted blood flow. Jordan was beside her, breathing slow on purpose, forcing his panic down the way he'd learned to do whenever things felt out of control. Somewhere above them, metal creaked as the building settled, and each sound made Alyssa flinch. Evan Carter paced a few steps away, checking his phone repeatedly. Up close, the man looked different than he had across the fence or over shared beers in summer. His lean frame seemed tighter, coiled, like someone always ready to run. A thin scar cut across his left eyebrow, something Alyssa had never noticed before. His eyes darted often, not with confidence but with calculation. Evan wasn't fearless, he was desperate. "Relax," Evan said without turning around. "No one's coming." Jordan studied him carefully. Evan's jacket was smeared with grease, his boots worn unevenly at the heel. This wasn't a man who lived comfortably. This was a man who'd been cutting corners for a long time. "You didn't plan on us finding the video," Jordan said, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. Evan stopped pacing and looked at him. "I planned on curiosity," he replied. "I didn't plan on persistence." Alyssa glanced at the knife still clipped at Evan's side. "You won't get away with this." Evan laughed quietly. "Your father already paid the price. I just need time." Time. That word stayed with Alyssa, because time was exactly what they needed too. As Evan turned away again, distracted by a call that went unanswered, Alyssa leaned closer to Jordan, lowering her voice to a breath. "The rope isn't tight." Jordan nodded slightly. He had noticed it earlier. Evan had tied them quickly, carelessly. Confident people made careless mistakes. Afraid people made worse ones. Jordan worked his fingers, slow and patient. His wrists were thinner than Alyssa's, and after several minutes he felt the knot loosen enough to slide one hand free. He froze when Evan shifted, then continued once the man resumed pacing. Outside, the wind howled through broken panels. Somewhere far off, a train horn sounded, long and mournful. Jordan freed his other hand. He leaned toward Alyssa and whispered, "When I say run, don't look back." Alyssa's heart slammed against her ribs. "Jordan! I'll distract him." Before she could argue, Jordan pushed himself to his feet and kicked a loose metal rod across the floor. It clattered loudly, echoing through the warehouse. Evan spun around. "What are you—" Jordan lunged, not toward Evan but past him, straight for the side door. Evan shouted and gave chase. Alyssa didn't hesitate. She yanked her wrists free, ignoring the burn, and ran in the opposite direction, toward a gap in the wall where moonlight spilled through. Her breath tore from her chest as she squeezed through jagged metal and tumbled outside, scraping her arm badly. She didn't stop. Jordan burst out the side door seconds later, Evan close behind him. Jordan veered left, ducking between rusted shipping containers stacked like crooked towers. Evan swore loudly, slipping once on gravel. Jordan's lungs burned. His legs screamed. But then he saw it. The guard shack near the port road, its light still on. He reached into his pocket as he ran, pulling out his old backup phone, the cracked one he kept out of habit. The screen flickered to life. 3% battery. He dialed. 911, what's your emergency? My sister and we were kidnapped, Jordan gasped. Warehouse near the old dock road. Evan Carter. He framed our father. Behind him, Evan's footsteps slowed. Sirens sounded in the distance before Evan could reach them. Evan stopped running. For a moment, he simply stood there, chest heaving, face pale under the harsh warehouse lights spilling out behind him. Then he turned and fled into the dark. Police arrived within minutes. Alyssa sat on the curb, shaking, wrapped in a blanket someone had placed around her shoulders. Jordan stood beside her, answering questions, his voice hoarse but clear. Officers photographed her injuries, took statements, searched the warehouse. Inside Evan's abandoned truck, parked not far from the building, they found a laptop. The device was old but carefully wiped, or so Evan thought. At the precinct, Detective Sarah Collins took over the case. Sarah was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail and sharp, observant eyes that missed very little. She had grown up in the same city, watched too many cases fall apart because no one bothered to look past the obvious. That history had hardened her, not into cruelty, but into caution. She listened without interrupting as Alyssa and Jordan told their story. When Jordan mentioned the video footage and the laptop, Sarah's expression changed. "Bring it here," she said. Hours later, as dawn crept back over the city, a forensic technician called Sarah over. "You need to see this." On the laptop were deleted files, messages, delivery coordinates, timestamps. One message stood out, sent less than an hour before Marcus had been stopped. Marcus's car arrives at the port at 8:10. Pick up fast. Don't let him see anything. Sarah leaned back slowly. "This wasn't random," she said. "This was planned." Alyssa felt tears burn behind her eyes, not of fear this time, but of relief. They weren't crazy, they weren't alone. As officers moved to locate Evan Carter, Sarah turned to the siblings. "You did the right thing," she said, "and you were brave." Jordan looked down at his scraped hands. "We just couldn't let them take him." Sarah nodded once. "Sometimes that's how justice starts." Across the city, Marcus Hill sat alone in a holding cell, unaware that the night had shifted in his favor, unaware that the truth was no longer buried in the dark. But it was moving, and it was coming. The courtroom felt different that morning. It was the same room, same wooden benches, same flags behind the judge's seat, but the air was no longer dull and settled. It was tight, charged, like something unseen was pressing against the walls, waiting to be released. People leaned forward instead of back. Whispers didn't die quickly this time. They carried, sharp and restless. Marcus Hill stood at the defense table once again, wearing the same borrowed suit, but his posture had changed. He was still restrained, still officially the accused, yet there was a quiet steadiness in him now. After nights in a holding cell, after learning what his children had survived, fear had burned down to something harder. Resolve. Across the room, Evan Carter sat at the witness table. He looked smaller than before. His shoulders slumped, his once careless posture replaced by stiffness. The lean confidence he carried in the warehouse was gone. His hands shook slightly as they rested on the table, fingers tapping without rhythm. He avoided looking at Marcus, staring instead at the polished wood as if it might swallow him whole. Judge Harold Whitman entered, his expression neutral but alert. He sensed it too. This case had shifted overnight. He took his seat and nodded once. "Proceed," he said. Marcus's defense attorney had changed. Standing now was Eleanor Brooks, a public defender assigned after Detective Sarah Collins submitted new evidence. Eleanor was a black woman in her early 50s, medium height, with a strong build and silver-threaded hair pulled back neatly. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried a sharp intelligence shaped by decades of fighting uphill battles in courtrooms like this one. She had built her reputation on patience and precision, not theatrics. She rose slowly. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, "the defense requests permission to present newly obtained evidence relevant to the charges against Mr. Hill." The prosecutor, Daniel Reeves, stood immediately. "Objection. The court has already reviewed preliminary materials. This is an attempt to delay proceedings." Eleanor didn't look at him. "This evidence did not exist in our possession at the time of the preliminary hearing." Judge Whitman paused, then nodded. "Proceed." A technician rolled a monitor into place. The screen flickered, then brightened. The video began to play. Grainy at first, then clear enough. A figure appeared under a streetlight. A car parked along the curb. The timestamp glowed in the corner of the screen. 12:57 a.m. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as the figure approached the vehicle. Evan Carter. The video showed him glancing around, opening the trunk, struggling briefly as he lifted a large, dark crate. He pushed it inside, closed the trunk carefully, wiped the handle, and walked away. The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Chairs scraped. Someone gasped. Reeves slammed his hand on the table. "Objection! This footage could be altered. We have no confirmation of its authenticity." Eleanor waited until Judge Whitman struck the gavel. "Order!" She spoke evenly. "The footage was obtained from a third-party grocery store camera. We have the original file, metadata, timestamps, and sworn verification from the store owner, and forensic analysis confirming it has not been edited." She nodded to the technician, who displayed a document outlining the file's digital signature. Reeves opened his mouth, then closed it. Judge Whitman leaned forward. "Objection overruled. Continue." Marcus felt his chest tighten. He stared at the screen, at the proof he had prayed for in silence. His hands trembled slightly, but he didn't move. Eleanor changed the slide. Text messages filled the screen, white letters on black. "Marcus's car arrives at the port at 8:10. Pick up fast." A pause. Another message appeared. "If this goes wrong, he takes the fall." The courtroom went completely still. Eleanor turned slightly toward Evan. "Mr. Carter, these messages were recovered from your laptop found in your vehicle near the warehouse where the defendant's children were unlawfully detained." Reeves shot to his feet again. "Your Honor." Judge Whitman raised his hand. "Sit down, Mr. Reeves." For the first time since the case began, The judge's voice carried something other than impatience. He looked directly at Evan. "Mr. Carter, do you wish to explain these messages?" Evan swallowed. His jaw worked as if he were chewing on words that refused to come out. He glanced briefly toward Reeves, then down again. Silence. A thick, heavy silence. Judge Whitman exhaled slowly and turned his gaze toward Marcus. Something in his expression had changed. Not sympathy, not yet, but reconsideration. "Mr. Hill," the judge said, "you have maintained from the beginning that you did not know about the crate in your vehicle." Marcus nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Whitman looked back at the screen, then at Evan. "The evidence suggests your vehicle was used without your knowledge as part of a coordinated plan." Reeves finally spoke, his voice quieter now. "The prosecution requests a recess to review the new evidence." Judge Whitman shook his head. "Denied." A collective breath was released across the room. Eleanor placed her hands lightly on the table. "Your Honor, we move for immediate dismissal of all charges against Mr. Hill based on clear evidence of third-party interference and malicious framing." Judge Whitman did not answer immediately. He studied the room, the faces of the spectators, the rigid stillness of the prosecutor, the collapsed posture of Evan Carter, and, finally, Marcus Hill, the man he had doubted. "Court will take this under advisement," the judge said at last. "However, based on the evidence presented today, this court acknowledges significant doubt regarding the defendant's culpability." Marcus felt his breath hitch. Judge Whitman struck the gavel. "We will reconvene shortly." As the judge rose, the room buzzed again, but this time the sound was different. It wasn't judgment. It was shock. Recalibration. Evan Carter remained seated, staring at the table. Marcus turned slightly and met Alyssa's eyes in the gallery. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely now. Jordan stood beside her, shoulders squared, his gaze never leaving his father. For the first time since the checkpoint, Marcus felt it. The weight shifting. Justice, long delayed, had finally entered the room. The courtroom rose as Judge Harold Whitman stood. For a long moment, he said nothing. He looked older than he had an hour earlier, as if the weight of reconsideration had pressed years onto his shoulders. His hands rested on the bench, fingers spread, steadying himself before delivering words that could not be taken back. "After reviewing all evidence presented," he began, his voice firm but measured, "this court finds that Marcus Hill was the victim of a deliberate and coordinated scheme." The room was silent. No whispers, no shifting, no breath taken too loudly. "All charges against Mr. Hill are hereby dismissed. He is to be released immediately." The gavel came down. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a crack in stone. Marcus didn't react at first. His knees buckled slightly, and he had to grip the edge of the table to keep himself upright. For days, hope had been something dangerous to touch. Now it rushed in all at once, overwhelming, disorienting. Behind him, Alyssa broke down completely. She covered her face with both hands, shoulders shaking as months of fear collapsed into sobs she could no longer hold back. Jordan stepped forward without thinking, reaching for his father. His hand closed around Marcus's wrist, grounding them both. "It's over," Jordan whispered, though his own voice trembled. "You're free." Marcus turned and pulled both of his children into him. The hug was clumsy, constrained by space and disbelief, but it was real. He pressed his forehead against Jordan's, then Alyssa's hair, breathing them in as if afraid they might disappear. Across the room, Evan Carter was led away quietly, his head bowed, wrists cuffed once more, this time without protest. He did not look back. Outside the courthouse, snow had begun to fall. It wasn't heavy, just slow, deliberate flakes drifting down through the gray afternoon sky. Reporters clustered near the steps, Voices overlapping, cameras flashing, but Marcus barely noticed. He kept his hands in his coat pockets, Alyssa on one side, Jordan on the other, the three of them moving as a single unit. Detective Sarah Collins waited near the curb. She stood with her hands in the pockets of her long coat, posture relaxed now that the pressure had lifted. Up close, her tired eyes softened when she saw them. Sarah had spent most of her career watching cases end without closure. This one mattered. "You did good," she said simply, nodding at Alyssa and Jordan. "Both of you." Alyssa wiped her face, embarrassed but grateful. "Thank you for believing us." Sarah gave a small shrug. The truth usually speaks. Someone just has to listen long enough. She shook Marcus's hand firmly. "Go home," she said. "Be with your family." That evening, the house felt different. The front door opened, and warmth rushed out to meet them. The soft glow of Christmas lights, the faint smell of pine and cinnamon still lingering in the air. Nothing had changed inside, and yet everything had. Marcus paused just inside the doorway. The tree stood where he had left it, ornaments still boxed, lights waiting. The plastic star remained on the coffee table, untouched. Jordan picked it up. "You promised," he said quietly. Marcus swallowed hard. "I did. See." Jordan stepped onto the chair, hands steady as he placed the star at the top of the tree. When he climbed down, Alyssa plugged in the lights. They flickered once, then came alive, filling the room with soft color. For the first time in days, Marcus allowed himself to sit. He sank into the couch, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the tree. The silence was gentle now, not oppressive. Outside, snow continued to fall, dusting the windowsill. "I didn't know if I'd ever see this again," Marcus said quietly. Alyssa sat beside him. "We knew you would." He turned to her, studying her face, older somehow than it had been a week ago, stronger. Jordan stood nearby, arms crossed loosely, trying to look calm, but failing. "You shouldn't have had to do what you did," Marcus said. Jordan shrugged. "Someone had to." Marcus shook his head. "No, someone chose to." That distinction mattered. Later, they sat around the small kitchen table, sharing takeout Chinese food because no one had the energy to cook. They laughed softly at how wrong everything had gone and how right it felt now. The TV played a muted holiday movie in the background, ignored. At one point, Alyssa reached across the table and squeezed her father's hand. "You know what scares me most?" she asked. Marcus looked at her. "What?" "That it could have ended differently. That if we hadn't pushed, if we'd stayed quiet." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's the truth about justice," he said. "It doesn't arrive on its own. Someone has to carry it." Jordan leaned back in his chair. "Even when it makes you look guilty." Marcus smiled faintly. "Especially then." That night, before bed, Marcus stood alone in the living room for a moment longer. He touched the tree lightly, feeling the warmth of the lights under his fingers. Outside, snow covered the street in white, softening the world. Christmas had returned, not as a miracle, not as luck, but as proof. Proof that truth could survive, that family could stand against a system stacked against them, that justice, delayed and resisted, could still be claimed. Marcus turned off the lights and headed upstairs. Home at last. At the end of this story, the lesson is simple but powerful. In everyday life, not all injustice looks dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, procedural, and wrapped in authority. Sometimes good people are judged not by who they are, but by how easy it is to blame them. Marcus Hill's story reminds us that truth does not always rise on its own. It often waits for someone to stand, speak, and refuse to walk away. We may not all face a courtroom, but we all face moments where silence feels safer than honesty, where doing the right thing costs more than doing nothing. In those moments, courage does not always look loud or heroic. Sometimes it looks like persistence, faith, and choosing to protect what is right even when the world misunderstands you. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from and what part of the story stayed with you the most. Your voice matters more than you think. If you believe that truth still has power, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so these stories can reach more people. And for everyone watching, may God bless you and your family. May He protect the innocent, strengthen the weary, and bring light where there is darkness. If you believe in justice guided by faith, type Amen in the comments.